All right. First rule of this channel, we not talk about this channel. Second rule of this channel, this is not legal advice. So this is going to be the 2024 fantasy football offseason preview for the Los Angeles Chargers. One of the things to look at when we break down some of these teams is the fact that some of them are not particularly fun because it comes down to, are they a good offense and do they have a good quarterback? And if the answer to that is like no or maybe, then that makes it really easy. In regards to say like the Buccaneers, the Browns, and the Broncos, we're looking at like Deshaun Watson, Baker Mayfield, and Bo Nix, and it makes it harder to think about the over underlines for players when we don't even know if the offenses are going to be good. If we're thinking they're going to be like Bryce Young and we're going to get like 2,800 yards out of the passing game and another bad offensive line, so they're not going to be able to support any of the running backs. Like it's a hard road to look at saying that there is an over underline on a guy, even with there's opportunities, because of the fact that you're just throwing it in the middle of a lake and hoping that you get something that something close to what is actually going to be in real life. So in this case, when we're looking at the Chargers, they have a very good quarterback, Justin Herbert. This is one of the things that, like, between him and Patrick Mahomes, I basically say I give up. I don't know who's a good quarterback anymore. I thought he was going to be a bust coming out of Oregon. It turned out he was a league winner from a fantasy football perspective. Finished as quarterback 2 in 2021. So yeah, I like the ability to build a team around a guy like Justin Herbert. He's going to be in that category of guys that are, from a quarterback perspective, can they win me a league? Can they not win me a league? Yeah, he can win me a league, especially at the price that he's going at this year. So that's something to be looking at going on. A little bit of news and notes with the real life football. Robert Tonyan signs with the Minnesota Vikings. This is a pretty good indication that TJ Hawkinson is maybe not going to start the season on the active roster, maybe on the PUP. They have a blocking tight end. This means that Robert Tonyan is probably going to slot in to be the receiving tight end with TJ Hawkinson coming back from that knee injury. Something to be paying attention to as the offseason rolls on into the season. So looking at the Chargers this year, last year they fired Brendan Staley, the head coach. I have no comment on him. Tom Telesco, the general manager, he's the one who drafted Quentin Johnston in the first round. And offensive coordinator Kellen Moore, who I do like as a coach overall, thanks to the guy in the comments telling me that I should just keep my mouth shut. So anyway, moving on. I don't really care about the yards and the points scored for the Chargers last year because of the fact that they fired all those guys, and then Justin Herbert got injured week 14. So doesn't really matter. This is going to be apples and oranges. They went out and hired Jim Harbaugh as head coach of the Chargers. Again, I tend to think that he's a good football coach, but doesn't matter from a fantasy perspective. He's going to have to give you the points that you want in your fantasy lineup for it to matter. He went and lost a Super Bowl with the 49ers with Colin Kaepernick at quarterback and Frank Gore. He likes to run the football downhill, and before that, he was at Stanford. And then he won a national championship last year at Michigan, running the football downhill. Like teams are going to tell us what they're going to do sometimes, and that's what Jim Harbaugh does. Now, the other thing is he brought in Greg Roman as his offensive coordinator. Back when he was at Stanford, he was the associate head coach. And then when Jim Harbaugh went to the San Francisco 49ers, he brought Roman along to be the offensive coordinator the year that they went to the Super Bowl and ran the football downhill. Then Greg Roman winds up as the offensive coordinator for the Ravens in 2022, 2023. And he leaves at the end of that season. They ran the football downhill when he was the offensive coordinator for the Ravens. He got hired to be the offensive coordinator for the Chargers. So I'm going to guess that Jim Harbaugh, who likes to run the football downhill, is going to bring in Greg Roman to run the football downhill because that's what he did when he was the offensive coordinator for the Ravens. And we'll talk about the running back room because he brought in J.K. Dobbins and Gus Bus from the Ravens running back room to be a part of the offense that just basically runs the football downhill. So that's what's going on with all of that. And then from a draft perspective, they went out and they drafted Joe Alt, offensive tackle from Notre Dame. From the standpoint of very special, if I had an opinion on football players, like Joe Alt has the ability to be very special. You're not going to see it in your fantasy lineup, but that's what he may end up doing. Ladd McConkey, second round draft pick, wide receiver out of Georgia. I saw him one play 2 years ago run a double move, and I went, that guy's pretty good. He can run routes. And then he goes out and runs a 4.39 40 at the combine. Yeah, really good landing spot, really good player attached to Justin Herbert. We'll talk about the ridiculous upside of what's going on with this here in a second. Kamini Valdell, running back from Troy. I watched tape on him. He looks like Gus Bus. He runs downhill. Some interesting stuff. Don't particularly like the 6th-round draft pick, but overall, like, I do think he fits into this running back room. Brendan Rice, wide receiver from USC. I thought he was going to go a little bit higher. Very interesting because of the wide receiver room. Don't think he's going to have very much fantasy value this year. Maybe down the line could be the number 2 in the offense. And then Cornelius Johnson, wide receiver from Michigan, playing underneath his old head coach from college. Again, if he's part of this Michigan offense, he can run block. And it's not going to be surprising to me that he makes the roster. And it's also not going to be surprising to me that Brendan Rice makes the roster and Kamini Valdell. And for the most part, I don't generally like looking at guys that are under a 4th-round draft pick because of how hard it's going to be for them to make the team. But I think that all 3 of these guys will make the team, even though Vidal's probably going to be the only one that's fantasy relevant. The other little thing to look at when we start breaking down the wide receivers, the running backs, and the tight ends is going to be the Chargers do have to clear this $51 million dead cap this year so they can start building for the Justin Herbert, Jim Harbaugh future. And you see some of the other teams that have this massive dead cap hit would be the Vikings and the Bills. The other one would be the Jets, and that's because they're trying to win a Super Bowl this year. So, like, that's just something to be paying attention to as we move along. Let's see, pulling up this one. So Justin Herbert, he's going right now, before I forget, as 103 overall on Fantasy Pros, quarterback 14. I have him at quarterback 12. Remember, can he win me a league? Can he not win me a league? Justin Herbert can win you a league. He's looking at something like 4,000 yards passing, 25 touchdowns to go along with 300 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns. That's what I would be guessing he's going to do. I have this pulled up from last year. Last year, the Redskins led the league with 336 pass attempts. They were also not very efficient at 6.6 yards per attempt. All the way down here at the bottom of the San Francisco 49ers, they were 491 pass attempts. They were the worst. They also were the most efficient at 9.3 yards per attempt. So yesterday when I talked about Kyler Murray and the Arizona Cardinals and I said 540, that's basically what Jalen Hurts did last year. I tend to be very conservative on my estimates for production for players, so they can only hit my reward. They're never going to really hurt me. So when I talk about the Chargers today and this Jim Harbaugh offense, I'm going to probably be talking about 500 pass attempts, which is going to be like towards the bottom. It's not going to be surprising to me that Jim Harbaugh, who's a good coach, is going to be like, hey, I'm going to open this up and let Justin Herbert win the game for me. I'm just not going to be expecting there to be a lot of pass attempts. It doesn't mean that they can't be efficient, even though there aren't a lot of attempts like with the 49ers. So the other thing to look at with all of this is that stat line with Justin Herbert that I'm going to be expecting is going to be close to that Brock Purdy stat line, 4,200 yards, 31 touchdowns. Probably going to have a little bit more nimbly bimbly. So you're looking at a guy that going at like around about 100, quarterback 14, is going to really be able to flirt with this high end sub-elite category of quarterbacks just because of what he is. He doesn't have to have this Peyton Manning, Drew Brees 5,000 yard season that he had in 2021 for him to be able to win you a league at the price that he's going. Now, the other thing to be looking at all of this, and I have the rankings up here, is if I'm going to be punting the quarterback position, he would be one of the guys that I would be looking to target relative to other guys that are out there because of that high end range of outcomes. You could be looking at like 4,500 yards passing and like 35 touchdowns to go along with like 300 or 400 yards. That Jim Harbaugh offense with Greg Roman has designed running plays for the quarterbacks in it. We saw that a little bit with JJ McCarthy last year at Michigan. Not going to be surprising if we get surprised a little bit about Justin Herbert's athletic ability in this range. So I do like him a lot where he's going. The other thing to be looking at all of this is there are a few guys like your Trevor Lawrence, and this is already updated since I started talking about this earlier today. Trevor Lawrence in this category that I may like a little bit better just because I get to spend a few picks less to get him. I also like Kirk Cousins because of that higher volume passing that we may be projecting to be a part of the Falcons this year. And then generally Jaden Daniels to punt the position further. But this would be the range of guys that I would be looking at to go, hey, I'm going to go punt the position, pick one of these guys. I still have the ability to win a league. I think even in one quarterback leagues, I would be drafting 2 quarterbacks. Because of the running back market, I may not do that this year. So I would be looking at taking one of these guys and just being like, yeah, good enough. And in my auction league, I might be able to get one of these guys for like a couple dollars, and it may cost me like $30 for like a Josh Allen. You're probably looking at like we talked about before, like a second or third round pick in a snake draft league. So it's just something to be generally paying attention to. I do like this, but I can continue to punt the position a little bit further down the line. I'm not expecting a super high volume passing offense. Does have the nimbly bimbly, and expecting that he's good at football, going to be able to get me those passing touchdowns that I need to win my league. So overall, and then the other thing with this one, Easton Stick, they brought him back. He was a little surprising as a backup quarterback to fill in at the end of the year. So peace of mind wise, like, yeah, I do like it. He does appear to be a competent backup quarterback in all of this going forward. So those 500 pass attempts are going to come up here in a second. So just kind of remember that. More pass attempts, that's not a bad thing for the weapons. Less pass attempts doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing if they can be ultra efficient. So the running back room, you're looking at Gus Edwards. They bring him in on a 2-year, $6.5 million contract, 3.35 guaranteed. And they bring in J.K. Dobbins at 1 year, $1.6 million, $50,000 guaranteed. That means they're not expecting him to make the roster. And then a 6th-round draft pick, Kamani Vidal. Now, a couple other things. They let Austin Eckler go. Josh Kelly's gone. There's a whole bunch of vacated opportunities going on in this offense. They have a few other guys that they brought in. I don't really know anything about Elijah Dotson. Jared Patterson, I remember being like fantasy relevant for like a week in 2021. You have Isaiah Spiller, the 4th-round pick last year of his deal going on with the Chargers. So I'm expecting Vidal to have a really good chance to not only make the roster, but maybe end up being the starting running back at the end of the season. In this case, we are going to be talking about David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. If J.K. Dobbins makes the roster, it's going to really screw the backfield up. But overall, I'm with that $50,000 guaranteed. I'm not expecting him to make that. So Gus Edwards right now is 106 overall, running back 35. I have this backfield at running back 17. You're looking at a good offense for running backs, running downhill, attached to a Justin Herbert offense. Like, these are good things that's going to give you a lot of opportunity for Gus Bus to do what he does well, and that's fall into the end zone in the red zone. Like, that's a major thing that we want out of these guys. The other thing that we're not going to probably be getting out of these guys between Gus Edwards and Vidal, you're not going to be looking at the design passing work from the running back position, not what they do. If J.K. Dobbins makes the roster, that may be what he does. But overall, like, Gus Bus ain't going to be a pass receiver. Vidal can pass block. I don't know how much he's going to be able to run those Christian McCaffrey type option routes. So in general, these are going to be very limited running backs. And the best guy to kind of comp Edwards and Vidal to this year is going to be David Montgomery, and that 200 rush attempts, 1,000 yards rushing, and probably about like 10 rushing touchdowns. You're looking at like RB2s from Vidal and Gus Edwards this year. Very limited receiving work, 16 receptions, 117 yards. That's what I'd be looking at. Your scoring settings and my scoring settings may be different, but 14 points a game that you'd be looking at from like Edwards and Vidal. And to look at this, Jahmyr Gibbs is not Vidal and Gus Edwards, but what I'm bringing up is you can have these two running backs coexist in the same offense, running downhill, getting about 200 touches a piece, in the backfield, 200, 250 touches. That could happen. And to bring this up, last year with the Baltimore Ravens, they had 541 rush attempts. So even at the bottom end of this whole thing with the Washington Commanders, like 350, probably a very conservative guess is going to be like 450 rush attempts to be split up right now between expected Gus Bus and Vidal. Maybe J.K. Dobbins makes the roster. The other thing to look at with all this, with that Gus Bus contract, they have it out after 2024. He's only getting paid $3.2 million a year. They could have gone out and signed Zach Moss for $4 million. They could have re-signed Austin Eckler for 4.2. They could have gone out and signed Devin Singletary for 5.5. Again, they brought Gus Edwards in for a reason, it looks like, and they brought him in at a very low contract to find out. So just something to be paying attention to in all of this. Vidal, he is a 4.46 guy. So I do like the higher upside of all these guys, and he's going to basically cost you absolutely nothing to go get. the Chargers kicker is going higher than Vidal is on Fantasy Pros right now. He's going 241, running back 68. I have him as running back 17. Again, the backfield is running back 17 because of Jim Harbaugh, Justin Herbert, and the vacated opportunities. J.K. Dobbins is going 157, running back 51 overall. And, I have him at running back 17. I'm expecting him to get cut. If he stays on the roster, I may move the Chargers running back room down. I obviously will, but I'm expecting him to get cut. And then finally, Gus Edwards is going at 106 overall, running back 35. Again, your 0 running back builds, like these are the guys to be targeting. And I do like Vidal more in this range just to like kick the can down the road, 13th round pick, trying to figure out how this backfield shakes out. Again, the biggest thing that I'm worried about is that 6th round draft capital on Vidal over Gus Edwards. I'm expecting Gus Edwards to probably get the bell cow work at the beginning of the season, and then the more that they trust Vidal as the season goes on to be a pass blocker, he may have a little bit more pass receiving upside attached to Justin Herbert. So this would be the guy that I would be potentially picking up to win me a league versus Gus Edwards being the safe guy that is probably going to be able to fall in the end zone about 10 times attached to this offense. All right, hopefully I got everything on that one. Did talk about the running back room. Let's move on to the wide receiver room in this one. Right here. So Ladd McConkey, I'm just going to, not bury the lead. Would not be shocked to find out that Ladd McConkey has 200 targets this year. This is how odd the wide receiver room, the tight end room, and the running back room are for the Chargers. So that would jump him all the way into this tier, which is basically like Tyreek Hill to CD Lamb, based off of that. So you're definitely looking like, if you're looking for this year's Puka Nacua, yeah, it's Ladd McConkey going in this offense. And that's my estimate of Ladd McConkey being able to have about 200 targets this year is based off of Josh Palmer having 100, the wide receiver 3 having 100, and then 100 going to the tight ends and the running backs in this offense. So that's with 500 pass attempts on the season. If there's more pass attempts, there's still a chance that Ladd McConkey is going to have 200 or 200 targets, just to be clear. So I brought this up with how unfun it is to break down certain offenses and teams telling us what they're going to do. So here's the Bills, and these are the top 4 guys that we're expecting with the Bills: it's Dalton Kincaid, Khalil Shakur, Curtis Samuel, Keon Coleman. There was about 580 pass attempts for the Bills last year, expecting that all these 4 of these guys are going to have about 100 pass receptions or 100 targets. And we can also throw, and I'll throw like James Cook in here real quick. We can even throw like James Cook into this mix where he's going to get probably like, I would probably guess like 70 targets this year because of the vacated targets from Stephon Diggs. When we look at all these guys, if we give them all these and then other wide receivers, other tight ends, Dawson Knox, you're probably being able to generate the entirety of that 580 pass attempts that took place for the Buffalo Bills last year. The over-underline for Dalton Kincaid, Khalil Shakur, Curtis Samuel, Keon Coleman, James Cook at generally being 100 pass or 100 targets on the season is going to allow me to say, hey, they're all going to be about like 800 yards receiving. The only guy I would be really interested in is Dalton Kincaid because he's a tight end, and then Khalil Shakur because of the potential upside to be that wide receiver 1 in this offense. There isn't really a reason to speculate on anything higher than about 800 yards and 100 targets because the team could just generally have this like wide receiver, this receivers by committee approach, and they all are flirting with being fantasy relevant, but none of them are going to win me leagues outside of the tight end. That's what my thought would be on the Bills. That's why I don't find them as fun to break down, because I can distribute all the targets amongst themselves and it ends up being like just boring. The the Los Angeles Chargers, on the other hand, with Ladd McConkey, like even if we give 100 targets to Josh Palmer and then 100 targets to your Quentin Johnston, your Brendan Rice's, your Cornelius Johnson, and your GJ Sharks, we can give another 100 targets to the running backs. None of those running backs are particular, like they're not receiving backs. And we can get 100 targets to the tight end room, Will Disley, like Donald Parham, like Hayden Hurst. Like these are not particularly interesting guys. And that's still going to leave us with 500 pass attempts with 200 going to Ladd McConkey. That's why I can say it can be that ridiculously high and he can still return on investment. So The other things to break down in this would be DJ Shark. He did sign a 1-year, $3 million deal. It's $2 million guaranteed. He's probably going to make the roster. I don't know if he's going to necessarily finish the season on the roster, but with $2 million guaranteed, they may keep him around, allowing these guys to fight with each other for competition of opportunity. Now, I have this pulled up. They also brought in a lot of free agent wide receivers. You're looking at Leon Johnson from Oklahoma State. Don't know anything about him. Jalen Johnson, wide receiver out East Carolina. Don't know anything about him. Cornelius Johnson, we talked about him already from Michigan. Jalen Gill, wide receiver from Fresno State. Don't know anything about him. The only guy that I really know something about is Simi Fakoku from Stanford, and he's going to be a fifth-year guy. So they may bring in like 6 guys, but there isn't going to be a lot of there isn't anybody else to be in competition for targets with Ladd McConkey outside of Josh Palmer, maybe being a wide receiver too. We can argue about how good Quentin Johnston is, but from last year with Josh Palmer, in those 10 games that he played, he had 61 targets. You're looking at the vacated targets of Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Then Josh Palmer would step in, and I think he could be a very solid wide receiver too in this offense. You're looking at him going at about 145 on Fantasy Pros, wide receiver 61. I think he should be going about wide receiver 49. If you're wondering about Quentin Johnston, if we give him 100 targets as wide receiver 3, I don't think we're looking at like Brendan Rice, Cornelius Johnson, and DJ Shark really eating into this anymore. Like, very limited amount of opportunities that are going to be going on. I can imagine Quentin Johnston from the last regime is on a very short leash. Wouldn't doubt it if he doesn't finish his rookie contract on the Chargers at this point. So, yeah, we could maybe talk about like 100 targets going to Josh Palmer, 100 targets going to Quentin Johnston. I don't think we're going to see 100 targets going to DJ Shark. Like, you're looking at probably like 60-ish to Quentin Johnston, 60-ish to DJ Shark, 100, 120 going to Josh Palmer. That's still going to leave us in like that 120 to 160 target range with Ladd McConkey. So like, that's what we're looking at. That's why I say with him as wide receiver 9 overall, I would be talking about the theoretical upside to be in this tier of guys just on opportunity. Your CeeDee Lambs, your Devontae Adams, your Tyreek Hills, and again, this year's Puka Nacua. That's why I would be talking about that overall. Even if he disappoints, Marvin Harrison probably doesn't have that road to finish with such a ridiculously high volume with Trey McBride in the lineup. That's just the long and short of how I get to what I get to with Ladd McConkey. Now, on Fantasy Pros, he's going at like 108 overall. I wouldn't necessarily feel good about drafting him outside of like the 5th round of your draft. Once I get into the 4th round, that high return on investment really starts to just make me less interested in him. I can imagine he's going to get hype trained up a lot as the offseason goes on. But yeah, like that's the road for him to be getting about 200 targets. Again, I think it's probably better to be thinking he's going to get about 140 targets, 1,200 yards, and 7 touchdowns. That's exactly what I would be putting at Marvin Harrison to finish with the Cardinals. Just a higher potential range, higher upside with Ladd McConkey because of the targets. And he's attached to Justin Herbert. Marvin Harrison's attached to Kyler Murray. That's how I would get all this. I do like Josh Palmer to finish in that wide receiver 2 type range. So again, 800 yards receiving, like 5, 6, 7 touchdowns would probably be the range that I'd be looking at him to be in this offense, generally speaking. And because of the DJ Shark signing, Quentin Johnston, like he's off my board at this point. I would probably move him outside of that wide receiver 70 range, unless we hear something odd going on. Maybe he wins the wide receiver 2 job. I'm expecting him to compete with that wide receiver 3 position in this offense. That's what I'd be expecting going forward. All right. Let's see. Talk about this, and then talk about this. That's all I got for the wide receivers at this point for the Chargers. And then we'll finish with the tight end room. The only guys that I have worse than the Chargers at this point is going to be the Colts. The Chargers tight end room is tight end 32. The only reason why the Colts is worse is because they actually have more guys to figure out like who's going to be the guy who's going to get there. So Will Disley, his contract is going to be 3 years, $14 million. We can pull him up. We can see him all the way down here. You're looking at like Mo Alley Cox. The Chargers let Jared Everett walk to the Bears for $6 million. Tyler Conklin, we'll talk a little bit about him. Josh Oliver's there at 7. Colby Parker, he signs from Seattle to the Rams for 7.5. So it gives you a pretty good idea of what Will Disley is worth on the open market, and he's the tight end one for the Chargers right now. So these guys were basically not going drafted at all. I couldn't even find them on Fantasy Pros beforehand. And again, there are so many other guys that I would care about with this. Maybe you're looking at a Kyler Conklin type of season for one of these guys. 87 receptions, 61 or 87 targets, 61 receptions, 621 yards. Obviously, we're going to probably put the over-under line on receiving touchdowns about like 3 or 4 for this group. They also brought Hayden Hurst in. This is a 1-year, $1.125 million contract. So, and there's no guaranteed money I can see. Like, I'd be surprised he makes the roster. Donald Parham, he was fun when the Chargers are throwing it all over the yard. I don't know if he's going to be a blocker in this offense. So, our dreams of getting a Donald Parham breakout season are probably pretty low. I don't even know if he's going to make the roster. And I bring this up. They have a couple other guys that I would be a little bit more interested in from a real life football perspective. Ben Mason is a tight end fullback. He's from Michigan. He's going to block. And then you're looking at like Zach Hines, 6'7", 260, rookie free agent from South Dakota State. That seems like an awfully good, Y inline blocker that would, match up very well with, hey, we're going to run the football down the field. And then this Luke Benson pickup, I don't know if he's a long snapper or something, rookie tight end from Georgia Tech. He only had like 9 receptions in a year. I'm assuming something else is going on with him in the regards of special teams play. But I would imagine that there's a better chance that Ben Mason and Zach Hines are going to make the roster. And then at that point, like Will Disley or Hayden Hurst may be redundant. That's when your Donald Parham may not even be a thing when it's attached to all this. And I wouldn't be drafting any of these guys, maybe outside of like really deep leagues or dynasty leagues where I have like ridiculous rosters because maybe there's a tight end attached to Justin Herbert in this offense. Like maybe that would be the very long road about how any of these guys are fantasy relevant at all from that perspective. So to recap all of this, going back to this, I like Justin Herbert at about like quarterback or 103 overall, quarterback 14. I do like him in that range of punting the position. I do think there's a lot of upside to be had with him this year. I do like the 2 running backs for the Chargers, Gus Bus and Vidal. If Dobbins makes the roster, this is going to blow this whole thing up. But these 2 guys I do like. Vidal's probably got a little bit more league winner written on him, but I think they're both going to be about like 14 points a game, running back 2, and they're going outside of that range where you would be getting that. Like, again, think David Montgomery with these 2 guys attached to this offense, not going to be surprising in that regard whatsoever. And then finally, the wide receiver room, I really like Ladd McConkey. He's my wide receiver 9. Hopefully I explained why he's theoretically has such a high end range of outcomes. And I also like Josh Palmer being in that sneaky range if you're in those deeper leagues or 3 wide receiver leagues, going out like 145 to be the wide receiver 2 attached to Justin Herbert. And then finally, I'm not touching the tight end room for the Chargers with your roster. So anyway, tomorrow I will be pulling up the Chiefs.